The hum of the ultrasound machine filled the quiet exam room at Portland Women's Health Center. Julia Dawson lay back on the padded table, her hands clutching the thin blanket that covered her midsection. At 29, this was her first pregnancy, and she had come in expecting nothing more than a routine checkup. The sterile smell of disinfectant, the soft shuffle of papers, the distant voices from the hallway, all of it blurred together as Dr. Evelyn Grant, her OB-GYN, adjusted the wand across Julia's stomach. Julia's husband, Mark, sat close beside her, his hand resting gently on hers. His face lit up with anticipation, the kind that made him look younger than his 32 years. Mark had been waiting for this moment with quiet patience, sketching out dreams in his mind as carefully as the houses he designed as an architect. Then Dr. Grant broke the silence. "Well," she said with a professional smile, "I can confirm everything looks healthy. And Julia, congratulations. You're expecting twins." The words seemed to hang in the air. Twins. For a moment, Julia's mind went blank. She blinked rapidly at the doctor, then at the glowing screen, where two small flickers pulsed in tandem. Her throat tightened. Instead of joy, panic surged through her body like a sudden fever. "No," she whispered, shaking her head violently. "No, that can't be right. Please, not this." Her voice cracked, and tears spilled from her eyes before she could stop them. Mark leaned closer, squeezing her hand. Hey, it's okay," he murmured, his voice soft and steady, but Julia pulled her hand free. She covered her face, sobs breaking out of her like a dam had burst. Dr. Grant looked startled. "Julia, I assure you both babies are developing well. This is wonderful news." But Julia couldn't hear the reassurance. The word twins kept echoing in her mind, dragging her back to nights long ago when she had been 10 years old, tucking crying siblings into bed while her parents argued in the next room. She saw herself carrying laundry that wasn't hers, cooking meals with hands too small to reach the stove comfortably, running between diapers and homework while her mother sat idly and her father disappeared with another bottle. She had been the second mother in a household that had 8 children and too little hope to share among them. She had promised herself, fiercely and without compromise, that her own adulthood would be different. One child, that was all. One life to nurture fully, without drowning in exhaustion, without the crushing weight of endless responsibility. And now this. Julia's sobs grew louder, raw and inconsolable. Mark brushed her shoulder with tentative fingers. He tried to smile at Dr. Grant, tried to smooth over the outburst with a murmured, "She's just overwhelmed. We didn't expect this." But inside he was reeling too, not from fear, but from wonder. He had dreamed of a family bigger than just one child, though he had kept those hopes quiet after hearing Julia's firm declaration years ago. To him, twins felt like a gift, an unexpected blessing. Still, watching his wife crumple beneath the weight of her own memories, he swallowed the joy that threatened to escape. She came first, always. "Julia, sweetheart," he said gently, "will be okay. You're not a little girl anymore. You're not alone. It's me and you this time." She shook her head against the tears. "You don't understand. I can't, 2 babies, I can't do it." Mark kissed her forehead. "You won't be doing it alone. We'll figure it out together." The appointment wrapped up awkwardly, Julia clinging to tissues, her cheeks blotched red, while Dr. Grant printed ultrasound images with the kind of cheerful tone that felt almost cruel to Julia's ears. Mark tucked the photos into his jacket pocket before she could push them away. The drive home was quiet. Rain traced the car windows, blurring the gray streets of Portland. Julia leaned against the seat, silent, her thoughts locked inside. Mark kept one hand on the wheel and one on her knee, offering steady warmth. He didn't press her to talk. He knew enough about Julia's past to understand why the news had struck her like a blow, though perhaps not the full depth of her scars. It hadn't always been this way between them. Their story had begun years earlier, in the most ordinary yet fateful of places, a marketing office in downtown Portland. Julia had been a junior coordinator, drafting advertising copy late into the night. Mark, already working as a rising architect, had been brought in on a joint project to design promotional material for a housing development. They met over stacks of plans and brochures, both frustrated and tired, and somehow laughter had slipped in where annoyance had been. That laughter grew into coffee breaks, then late dinners, then long walks along the eastern promenade overlooking Casco Bay. Julia had been guarded, hesitant to trust, but Mark's patience wore down the walls brick by brick. 2 years later, they married in a modest ceremony by the ocean, surrounded by a handful of family and friends. With their savings, they bought a small plot of land on the outskirts of Portland. Mark poured himself into designing a home just for them, sketching every corner with Julia in mind. He built wide windows to let in the coastal light, a backyard large enough for future children, and a cozy kitchen where he pictured Julia baking. For him, the house was more than wood and nails. It was a promise of stability, the foundation for the family he hoped they would create. Now, as they pulled into the gravel driveway, Julia sat frozen, staring at the house that was supposed to be her safe place. Inside, it smelled faintly of cedar and the sea breeze that slipped through the cracks. Mark helped her out of the car, holding her hand even when she tried to pull away. In the living room, Julia sank into the couch, burying her face in her hands again. Mark crouched before her. "Listen," he said softly, "I know this is scary, but this house, this life, we built it for us, for our family. It doesn't matter if it's 1 child or 2. We'll make it work." Her sobs quieted into shaky breaths. She looked at him, eyes rimmed red. "You really think I can do this?" "I don't just think it," he answered. "I know it, because I'll be with you every step of the way." For the first time since the clinic, Julia let herself lean against him. The fear hadn't gone, not entirely, but in the steady circle of his arms, there was a sliver of comfort, a fragile beginning to hope. Julia sat in the quiet of her living room that evening, the faint creak of the old house mingling with the whisper of rain outside. Mark had gone upstairs to sketch in his office, leaving her alone on the couch. The ultrasound images lay on the coffee table, 2 tiny silhouettes she couldn't bear to look at. As her fingers brushed against the glossy paper, her mind slipped back decades, carrying her not to Portland, but to the heart of Pennsylvania, where her story had begun. Her childhood had never been the kind of memory people spoke of fondly. She had grown up in a cramped house that smelled of damp wood and cigarette smoke, with peeling paint on the porch and a roof that leaked each spring. Her father, once a promising factory worker, had surrendered to alcohol long before Julia was old enough to understand what addiction meant. By the time she reached school age, his presence was more often in a bottle than at the dinner table. Her mother didn't work. She drifted through the days in a haze of bitterness and resignation, nursing her own disappointments but never lifting a finger to ease the family's burden. That left Julia, the eldest of 8 children, to become the one who held everything together. At 10 years old, while other girls were learning to braid hair or ride their bikes across the cul-de-sac, Julia was learning how to keep a household from collapsing. She cooked basic meals with trembling hands, stirring pasta in a dented pot while her baby brother wailed in the background. She scrubbed laundry in a rusted sink, pinning damp clothes on a line strung across the yard. She braided her younger sister's hair in the mornings before school, packed their lunches when there was enough bread to go around, and tucked them into bed at night with stories she barely had the energy to tell. There were no Saturday sleepovers, no carefree afternoons at the mall. Childhood, for Julia, had been a ledger of responsibilities, tasks to complete, mouths to feed, tears to wipe away. And for all the effort, there was never enough. Not enough food, not enough money, not enough tenderness. Just survival. Even when moments of happiness slipped through, new clothes from a church charity, a birthday cake cobbled together from box mix, the thrill of a snow day, they were fleeting, always overshadowed by the relentless demands of a house with too many children and too little love. It was there, in that chaos, that Julia had made herself a vow. One child. That was all she would ever bring into this world. One life she could devote herself to fully without being stretched thin, without repeating the mistakes of her parents. She promised herself that no child of hers would ever feel invisible, would ever be asked to carry burdens meant for adults. She carried that promise like a shield into adulthood. It was part of what made her cautious in relationships, wary of anyone who spoke too eagerly of building a big family. When she met Mark, she had confessed it early on, almost defiantly. One child. That's my limit. He had nodded, and though she had caught a flicker of hesitation in his eyes, he never argued. Now, years later, sitting in the comfort of the house they had built together, she thought of that shield and how flimsy it suddenly seemed. Her life with Mark was nothing like the house she'd grown up in. This home was filled with light, large windows that framed the sea in the distance, the smell of cedar and fresh paint still lingering in the beams Mark had measured and nailed with his own hands. Their kitchen gleamed with stainless steel appliances, the counters clear except for the vase of fresh flowers Mark often brought home from the farmer's market. Most evenings were quiet, warm, ordinary in the best of ways. They cooked dinner side by side, sometimes pasta tossed with herbs from the small garden Julia had insisted on planting. They took walks along the shoreline, their laughter carried by the salty wind. On weekends, Mark tinkered with home projects while Julia browsed books or planned recipes she wanted to try. There were no shouting matches, no slammed doors, no younger siblings crying out for attention she couldn't give. It was, in every sense, the life she had dreamed of, the proof that she had broken free from the cycle of scarcity and chaos. This life was her happily ever after, carefully built piece by piece, fragile and precious. And yet, with the doctor's words still ringing in her ears, Julia felt that fragile life tilting. 2 children. The number alone threatened to unravel everything she had worked to protect. She imagined sleepless nights stretched endlessly. Double the crying, double the costs, double the fear that she would fail. The memory of her childhood clung to her like a shadow. She could still hear her father's slurred voice from the porch, still smell the sour beer on his breath. She could still feel the ache in her small arms from carrying a baby on one hip while balancing a pot of boiling water with the other. She had escaped that world. But had she escaped it enough to keep it from repeating? Upstairs, she heard the faint scratch of Mark's pencil as he sketched. He was planning the next addition to their home, a sunroom he thought would catch the best light in the mornings. Always building, always hopeful. That was who he was. Julia, meanwhile, felt like she was crumbling inside. She loved Mark deeply, and she wanted to give him the family he dreamed of, but 2 children at once felt like stepping back into the nightmare she had sworn she'd never relive. She pressed a hand to her stomach, trembling. 1 child, she reminded herself. That had been the promise, but fate, it seemed, had decided otherwise. 9 months later, the house Mark had designed echoed with the sound of new life. At Maine Medical Center in Portland, Julia Dawson gave birth to 2 healthy baby boys, a pair of cries piercing the delivery room and filling it with both chaos and wonder. She was exhausted, sweat dampening her hairline, her hands trembling from hours of labor. But when the nurses placed the infants in her arms, the weight of them felt surreal. 2 tiny bodies, red-faced and wriggling, each with a heartbeat steady against her chest. "Aiden and Cole," Mark whispered, his voice thick as he kissed her temple. He had insisted they name one after his grandfather, and Julia, though still dazed, had agreed. The other name she had chosen for herself. Together, they spoke them aloud like a prayer. Aiden Dawson and Cole Dawson, their sons. Mark's joy was unrestrained. He moved around the room in a blur, thanking nurses, holding one son while Julia held the other, taking picture after picture on his phone as if he could capture every second before it slipped away. His laughter was soft, reverent, a sound Julia had rarely heard from him, and it made the corners of her mouth, lift despite her exhaustion. For Julia, the joy was quieter, more hesitant. At first, she felt only the shock of doubling. 2 mouths to feed, 2 bodies to cradle, twice the work she had braced herself for. But as the days bled into nights and she learned the rhythms of her newborns, something shifted. She discovered that holding one son while hearing the soft coo of the other didn't feel like drowning the way she had feared. Instead, it was a strange, expansive fullness she hadn't expected. Love didn't divide between 2 children, it multiplied. The weeks after bringing the boys home were a blur of feedings, diaper changes, and stolen naps. The Dawson house, once quiet, now pulsed with life. Julia learned to distinguish their cries. Aiden's sharper, Cole's more guttural. She found herself smiling at the way they flailed their arms, as though they were already arguing in some secret language only they understood. Mark, true to his word, shared every task. He paced the halls with a baby cradled against his chest at 3 a.m, built a rocking cradle in the garage during the day, and whispered stories to them in the evenings about the houses he would one day design for them to see. Slowly, Julia's fear began to fade. She would sit in the nursery, rocking one son while the other slept nearby, and feel something she hadn't in years: peace. Her vow of only one child seemed less like a rule carved in stone and more like a shield she no longer needed. Outside their home, the Portland suburb where they lived revealed itself as a mosaic of lives. Their street wound gently through a neighborhood of tidy houses, some freshly painted, others weathered by salt air from the nearby coast. Families varied: older couples tending rose bushes, young professionals rushing off to work, parents pushing strollers in the evenings. The Dawsons fit comfortably in, their modest home blending with the rhythm of suburban life. But not all houses on the street told stories of stability. Across the way lived a young couple with a boy about 3 years old. Julia had noticed them before the twins were born, but in the haze of new motherhood, their presence became sharper in her mind. The parents often came home with grocery bags clinking faintly with bottles, their laughter too loud, too careless. Their son, Liam, trailed behind them in worn sneakers, his small frame lost in oversized clothes that never seemed warm enough for Maine's long winters. Julia's heart clenched every time she saw him. His hair was uncombed, his cheeks pale, his little hands bare even on days when frost still lingered on the grass. She caught glimpses of him standing by the chain-link fence in their yard, staring at her twins when she carried them outside for fresh air. His eyes were large and solemn, too old for a child his age. Mark noticed her lingering looks. "He's their child," he said gently one evening as they watched Liam toddle along behind his parents, who carried 6-packs of beer instead of toys or books. "It's not our place." Julia nodded, but the image of the boy stayed with her long after the Dawsons' front door had closed. She couldn't shake the ache in her chest. She had 2 babies now, 2 sons she could love and protect with all the strength she possessed. And yet, when she looked across the street and saw Liam's thin shoulders hunched against the wind, she felt a sharp tug in her heart, as if fate were whispering that her story with him was not yet written. The wind swept off Casco Bay that afternoon, carrying with it a cold drizzle that turned the Portland sidewalks slick and gray. Julia pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders as she hurried from the salon. Her freshly trimmed hair plastered damp against her cheeks, despite the umbrella she clutched. Mark had taken the car to work, so she was left to walk the mile from the bus stop back to their neighborhood. She didn't mind the exercise most days, but the sky felt heavy, and all she wanted was to get home to her boys. As she turned the corner near an abandoned house, an old clapboard place with peeling paint and sagging gutters that had sat empty for years, something caught her attention. A faint rustle, almost swallowed by the rain. She slowed, squinting through the drizzle toward a thicket of overgrown bushes by the side fence. At first she thought it might be a stray cat or raccoon, but then she heard it, the thin, uneven whimper of a child. Her heart lurched. "Hello." Julia called softly, stepping closer, rain splattering across her boots. A small figure, shifted beneath the dripping branches. When Julia knelt, her breath caught. It was Liam, the little boy from across the street. His jeans clung to his legs, soaked through. His socks were muddy, no shoes in sight. A threadbare sweater clung to his tiny frame, and in his arms he gripped a stuffed gray rabbit. It's formatted from the rain. His lips trembled as he looked up at her, wide-eyed and pale. "Liam," Julia whispered, shocked. "Honey, what are you doing out here?" He hugged the rabbit tighter, shoulders shaking. His voice came out as little more than a whisper. "Daddy's mad. Mommy's mad." The words were broken, but Julia understood enough. Her throat tightened. She reached out a hand, careful not to startle him. "It's okay. You don't have to stay out here in the cold. Come with me, sweetheart. Let's get you warm." For a moment, Liam hesitated. His small eyes darted between her hand and the wet ground, as if weighing whether he could trust her. Then, with a shiver that looked far too big for his tiny frame, he crept out from beneath the branches and let her guide him by the hand. By the time they reached the Dawsons' front door, Julia was drenched. She ushered Liam inside quickly, the warmth of the house wrapping around them. The smell of cedar and the faint lavender scent from the diffuser made the contrast almost dizzying. She hurried him to the laundry room, peeling off his soaked sweater and jeans with gentle hands. "Don't worry, I'll find something dry." She rifled through the closet until she pulled out a set of pajamas. Bright dinosaur prints, a gift someone had brought for Aiden and Cole that was still too big for them. She slipped the fabric over Liam's chilled skin, the sleeves hanging long past his wrists. "There," she said softly, brushing damp hair from his forehead. "Much better." In the kitchen, she warmed milk and stirred cocoa powder into it, the rich scent filling the air. She handed the steaming mug to Liam, who cradled it carefully in both hands. He sipped, closing his eyes as though the warmth traveled straight to his soul. The nanny, who had been minding Aiden and Cole, emerged from the nursery with a puzzled look. "Mrs. Dawson, who is this?" Julia's heart skipped. She hadn't thought this far ahead. "He's, a neighbor. Just here to play with the boys for a little while," she said quickly, forcing a smile. The nanny raised her eyebrows, but didn't press, gathering her bag when Julia told her she could head home early. Once the door shut, silence fell. Liam sat at the kitchen table, sipping cocoa, his rabbit drying on a towel nearby. Julia leaned against the counter, staring at him. Something deep inside her twisted. An ache, a fierce urge to protect. The sound of the front door opening made her jump. Mark stepped in, shaking rain from his jacket, briefcase in hand. He froze when his eyes landed on the boy at the table. "Julia," he said slowly, setting the case down. "Why is Liam here?" She swallowed hard. "I found him outside, in the rain. He was freezing, Mark. I couldn't just leave him there." Mark rubbed a hand over his face. "Honey, you can't just bring him into our house like this. He has parents. They don't take care of him," Julia snapped, her voice breaking with sudden tears. He was shivering, Mark. Alone, soaked through. What kind of parents let that happen? Mark crossed the room, lowering his voice. "I know it's awful, but he isn't ours. If we get involved without thinking, it could cause trouble. We have to return him." "No," Julia's response was immediate, desperate. She clutched the back of a chair as tears spilled down her cheeks. "I can't send him back there. You didn't see him. How scared he was. How cold. Please don't make me." Mark exhaled, frustration and worry etched across his face. He knelt beside her, taking her hands. "Julia, listen. We have to be smart. He's not our child. If we want to help, there are ways. We can talk to someone, maybe report it. But sneaking him in here? That isn't the answer." She shook her head, sobbing openly now. "I know what it's like to be forgotten, to be the one nobody looks out for. I won't do that to him." The air between them thickened with tension. The quiet sound of Liam sipping cocoa, the only thing breaking the silence. Julia's heart hammered in her chest, torn between the fear of overstepping and the certainty that she had just crossed a line she could never uncross. And Mark, torn between reason and compassion, could only look at his wife, his trembling, tear-streaked wife, and realize that this battle was only beginning. The weeks that followed were uneasy. Julia couldn't shake the image of Liam crouched in the rain, clutching his stuffed rabbit as though it were his only anchor in the world. Even after Mark had gently but firmly walked him back to his parents that night, the boy's face lingered in her mind. She found herself glancing across the street more often than before, heart tightening each time she saw him wandering the yard alone or following behind his parents like a shadow. Mark tried to reassure her. "We did what we could," he told her one evening as they washed bottles together at the kitchen sink. "If there's real neglect, the system will step in." But Julia's chest ached at the thought. She knew what the system often meant: strangers, uncertainty, children shuffled from one place to another. Then came the night everything changed. It was a Saturday, early spring, the air still sharp with lingering cold. Julia had just tucked Aiden and Cole into their cribs when her phone buzzed with a message from the neighbor 2 houses down. "Did you hear?" The text read, "There's been an accident." Her stomach sank. She typed back quickly what happened. The reply came within minutes. The couple across the street. "Car crash." Neither of them made it. Julia stood frozen in the nursery doorway, the glow from the baby monitor painting her in pale light. The sound of her son's breathing softly should have been comforting, but all she could hear was the echo of those words. Neither of them made it. By the next morning, the neighborhood was alive with whispers. News traveled fast in suburban Portland. Liam's parents had been driving home late, both of them drunk, when their car swerved off the road and struck a tree. The details blurred with each retelling, but the ending was always the same. They were gone, leaving behind a little boy with no one to claim him. Julia's heart pounded as she stood at the kitchen window, staring at the darkened house across the street. She could almost see Liam's small silhouette against the glass, though she knew it was only her mind painting him there. At the grocery store that week, she overheard more pieces of the story. One of the clerks leaned across the counter, lowering her voice. The relatives came in. "They don't want to deal with the boy. Just asked about what'll happen to the house." Another shopper chimed in, shaking her head. "He'll probably end up in foster care. That's what they said." Julia's hands trembled as she placed milk on the conveyor belt. Foster care. The words felt like ice in her veins. She imagined Liam's wide eyes staring up at strangers, being handed from one temporary home to another, clutching his rabbit as his only constant. She pictured him forgotten in the shuffle, lost the way she had once felt lost in her own childhood home, invisible among too many siblings. That night, she sat on the living room floor with Aiden and Cole crawling around her. Their tiny hands tugged at her sweater, their laughter bubbling up like music. But Julia's gaze drifted toward the window again. She pictured her sons in Liam's place, alone, unwanted, dependent on a system that couldn't possibly love them the way a parent should. The thought made her chest seize with panic. Tears blurred her vision. She pulled Aiden close, then Cole, hugging them so tightly they squirmed in protest. "I'll never let that happen to you," she whispered fiercely. But as soon as the words left her lips, her mind circled back to Liam, who was whispering the same promise to him. Mark found her later, rocking both babies in her arms, though they were long past due for sleep. "Julia," he said softly, setting down his work bag. "What's going on?" Her voice cracked as she answered. "He's going into foster care, Mark. They don't want him. They only care about the house, the money. What's going to happen to him?" Mark exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know, but you can't carry this like it's ours to fix." But Julia shook her head, tears streaming freely now. "You don't get it. I can't just stand by and watch. Not him. Not after everything I've seen. I won't let him be tossed around like he doesn't matter." The conviction in her voice startled even herself. For weeks, she had been weighed down by fear, but now a different kind of fire lit inside her. The thought of Liam swallowed by the foster system felt unbearable, like a wound she couldn't let form. That night, as the rain tapped gently against the windows, Julia lay awake staring at the ceiling. She thought of her childhood in Pennsylvania, of being the eldest daughter pressed into service as a second mother, of how it felt to be invisible. She thought of Liam's trembling voice in the rain. Daddy's mad. Mommy's mad. Her decision crystallized with terrifying clarity. She could not let him disappear into the system, not while she had a voice, not while she had arms strong enough to hold him and a home with room to spare. She turned toward Mark, sleeping soundly beside her, and whispered into the dark, "I can't let him go." Julia waited until after dinner to bring it up. The boys were asleep in their cribs upstairs, and the house had finally settled into its nighttime rhythm. Mark was at the kitchen table, flipping through architectural sketches with a pencil balanced between his fingers. The lamplight cast soft shadows across his face. He looked content, grounded, exactly the way she needed him to be. But her chest ached with the words pressing against her ribs. She couldn't keep them in any longer. "Mark," she began, her voice unsteady, "I want us to adopt Liam." The pencil dropped from his fingers, rolling across the table. He blinked at her as though she'd spoken in another language. "Julia, do you know what you're saying?" "Yes." Her hands trembled, but her tone was firm. "His parents are gone. The relatives don't want him. He'll go into foster care, and you know what that means. I can't let it happen. I won't." Mark leaned back, exhaling heavily. "Julia, this isn't just about wanting to help. Adoption isn't simple. There are responsibilities, expenses, lawyers, home studies, court hearings. It's months of paperwork, background checks, financial reviews. It's not just opening our door and saying he can stay." "I know," Julia shot back, tears pricking her eyes. "I've looked into it. I've read everything I can. And I don't care how hard it is. He needs us." Mark rubbed his forehead, his voice tight. "And what about Aiden and Cole? They're still babies. We barely sleep as it is. Adding another child, it's not fair to them. Or to us." Her voice broke as she leaned forward. "It isn't fair to Liam either. He didn't ask for this. He's 3 years old, Mark. If we don't step in, he's going to be bounced around from one stranger to another, growing up thinking no one wanted him. I know what that feels like." Mark's expression softened, but the conflict in his eyes was clear. He thought of their late-night walks with Liam tagging along awkwardly, of the boy's tentative smile when Julia gave him cocoa, of the way he lingered near their fence as if he wanted to belong. Against his better judgment, Mark realized he already felt protective of him too. He let out a long breath. "I don't want him to suffer either. But this is big, Julia. It changes everything." "Everything is already changing," she whispered, "and maybe that's okay." They sat in silence, the ticking of the kitchen clock filling the space between them. Finally, Mark reached across the table, covering her hand with his. "If we do this, we do it right. No shortcuts. We go through the court, CPS, the entire process." "Agreed." Julia's relief came in a rush, tears sliding down her cheeks as she nodded. "Agreed." The following weeks were a blur of phone calls and appointments. They met with a caseworker from the Maine Department of Health and Human Services, who explained the foster system and what it would take to pursue adoption. They filled out forms, submitted to background checks, and opened their home to inspection. Julia scrubbed every corner of the house until it gleamed, anxious for every visit. Mark rearranged his schedule, balancing deadlines at work with court dates and agency meetings. At one point, they met with Liam's extended relatives, an aunt and uncle who had driven up from Massachusetts. The conversation was brief and painfully matter-of-fact. "We can't take him," the aunt said flatly, her eyes darting anywhere but Julia's. "We don't have the time, the space, or the money. Honestly, it's better if he goes to a family who actually wants him." Julia's heart twisted at the words. but Mark squeezed her hand under the table. He could see the fire in her eyes and knew she would never back down. Months passed. Paperwork shuffled, hearings scheduled and postponed, until at last they stood before a judge in a small courtroom in Portland. Julia held Liam's tiny hand in hers, her heart hammering. The judge looked over the documents, then up at them with a measured expression. "Mr. and Mrs. Dawson," he said, "are you prepared to assume full responsibility for this child, financially, emotionally, and legally, as though he were born to you?" Julia's throat tightened. "Yes," she whispered. Mark nodded firmly. "Yes, we are." The judge's gavel came down with a sharp crack. "Then, by the authority of the state of Maine, the petition for adoption is granted." Julia felt her knees go weak, tears welling as she bent to hug Liam. He looked at her uncertainly, then at Mark, before leaning into Julia's embrace. That evening, the Dawsons returned home as a family of 5. The air in the house felt different, brighter, fuller, as though the walls themselves understood something had changed. Julia and Mark led Liam down the hallway to a small bedroom they had painted pale blue, with a quilt folded neatly on the bed and shelves stocked with toys and books. "This is your room now," Julia said softly. Liam's eyes widened to small fingers brushing the quilt as though testing if it was real. Then he looked up at them, his voice shy but clear. Can I say hi to my brothers?" Julia's tears spilled over as she nodded. "Of course you can." Together, they walked into the nursery where Aiden and Cole were stirring from their naps. Liam stepped closer, peering into the cribs. "Hi," he whispered, his smile tentative but hopeful. And in that moment, as Mark slipped an arm around Julia's shoulders, it was clear. Liam wasn't just a visitor anymore. He was theirs. The house was quiet except for the low hum of the heater and the faint rustle of wind off the bay. Julia padded softly into the kitchen, her hands wrapped around a cup of chamomile tea. She paused in the doorway, watching Mark at the table. He was bent over a sheet of graph paper, pencil in hand, sketching something with that familiar intensity that meant he was already lost in a new design. She hesitated, her heart beating faster than it should. For days, she had carried a secret, one that felt too fragile to put into words. But tonight, as the moonlight spilled across the floor, she knew she couldn't hold it in any longer. "Mark," she said quietly. He looked up, smiling absently. "Hey, couldn't sleep?" "Not really." She stepped closer, placing her mug on the table. Her fingers fidgeted with the hem of her sweater. "I need to tell you something, and you have to promise not to laugh." His brows rose. "Julia, I would never laugh at you." She drew in a deep breath. "I'm pregnant." For a second, the pencil stilled in his hand. His eyes widened, searching her face for any trace of a joke. "Pregnant? But Dr. Grant said, I know." Her voice trembled, but a smile broke through her nerves. She said the chances were almost 0. "But I took the test 3 times. I went back for blood work this week. It's real, Mark. I'm pregnant." He pushed back his chair, so quickly it scraped against the floor. "Oh my God!" In 2 strides, he was at her side, pulling her into his arms. His breath caught as he held her, one hand tangled in her hair, the other pressed against her back as though to keep her from vanishing. "Julia, this is the happiest moment of my life." Tears welled in her eyes as she whispered against his chest. "Are you sure? I know it's a lot. 3 little ones already. Don't." He tilted her chin up so she had to meet his gaze. His eyes shone with a mixture of awe and certainty. "This isn't a burden. It's a miracle. We thought it would never happen again, and yet here we are. Julia, we're being given something we didn't even dare to hope for." She laughed softly, tears spilling over. "I was so scared to tell you." He kissed her forehead. "Scared? I feel like the luckiest man alive. Look at us. Aiden, Cole, Liam, and now another little one. Our family is fuller than I ever dreamed." In the days that followed, Their home seemed infused with new energy. Julia caught herself humming while she folded laundry, her hands unconsciously drifting to her stomach. Mark, true to form, immediately began planning. One Saturday morning, he spread out blueprints on the dining table. "I'm thinking we expand the backyard," he said, eyes bright. "We'll build a swing set here, maybe add a sandbox next to it. And you've always wanted flower beds along the fence. We'll do that too. It'll be a space for all of them to grow up together." Julia leaned over his shoulder, studying the lines he'd drawn. "You really think we can manage it all?" He slipped an arm around her waist, pulling her close. "We've managed everything else. Why not this?" The twins toddled through the room just then, Aiden dragging a toy truck, Cole clutching a worn blanket. Liam trailed behind, carrying his stuffed rabbit. They crowded around the table, peering at the drawings with wide eyes. "What's that?" Liam asked, pointing to the sketched swing set. "That," Mark said with a grin, "is where you're going to fly higher than the trees." The boy's face lit up, his smile bright and unguarded. Julia felt her throat tighten at the sight. It was moments like this, small, ordinary flashes of joy, that reassured her they were doing the right thing. Spring crept slowly over Portland. The snow melted into soft earth, and the Dawsons' backyard became a canvas for transformation. Mark dug into the soil, setting posts for the swing set while Liam helped carry tools. Julia knelt by the fence, pressing seeds into neat rows, her hands dirty and her heart full. Aiden and Cole squealed in their playpen nearby, watching the flurry of activity. By the time the sun dipped low, the yard bore the beginnings of their dream. Wooden beams rising for the swing set, a box framed for the sandbox. Fresh soil dark against the budding flower beds. Julia stood with her hand on her stomach, the faint swell beneath her sweater a reminder of the new life growing inside. Mark joined her, wiping sweat from his brow, his smile tired but content. He wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "Can you picture it? The kids running here, flowers blooming, laughter everywhere." She leaned into him, her eyes glistening. "I can. For the first time in a long time, I really can." And as the evening light bathed their unfinished garden, Julia felt a sense of hope settle deep in her bones. For years, she had feared that too many children would break her, that her past would repeat itself. But standing there with Mark, surrounded by the children they already loved and the promise of one more, she realized something she had never allowed herself to believe. Love had no limits. 3 years passed, and the Dawson home blossomed in ways Julia never could have imagined. The backyard that Mark had once sketched on paper was now alive with color and sound. The swing set stood sturdy against the sky. The sandbox was filled with buckets and shovels, and flower beds lined the fence with bursts of tulips and daisies. The house itself hummed with the rhythm of family life, noisy, messy, but undeniably full. On a golden summer afternoon, the Dawsons gathered to celebrate Sophie's 3rd birthday. She had been born on a rainy night in June, a small miracle Julia never thought possible. And now here she was, bright-eyed, with dark curls bouncing as she toddled across the lawn. A checkered picnic blanket spread across the grass, topped with plates of sandwiches, bowls of fruit, and a pink frosted cake waiting to be cut. Aiden and Cole, now rambunctious 6-year-olds, darted back and forth across the yard in a game of tag. Their laughter rang out like bells, their legs carrying them faster than Julia could track. They were inseparable, mirrors of each other in spirit, if not always in looks. One would stumble, and the other would instantly reach to pull him back up. Near the picnic blanket, Liam sat with Sophie, carefully holding a small comb in his hand. At 6 years old, he had been a shy, uncertain boy, but at 9 he carried himself with quiet confidence. He leaned close to his little sister, tongue pressed in concentration as he tried to braid her short curls into something resembling pigtails. "Hold still, Sophie," he said gently, his voice patient. Sophie giggled, squirming under his hands. "It tickles." Julia watched from a few feet away, her chest swelling with emotion. The sight was so simple, yet it struck her deeply, her children together, caring for one another in ways she once feared would never be possible. Mark settled beside her on the blanket, handing her a glass of lemonade. "What are you staring at so hard?" he asked, though his smile said he already knew. She nodded toward the children. "Look at them. Aiden and Cole running wild. Liam fussing over Sophie like she's made of glass. Can you believe this is our life?" Mark followed her gaze, his expression softening. "I can, because we fought for it, and because you never gave up." Julia swallowed hard, memories tugging at her. There was a time when she had begged fate for only one child. One, because she thought that was all she could manage without losing herself. One, because the weight of her childhood still pressed heavy on her shoulders. And yet here she was, mother to 4, 2 born of her body, one chosen by her heart, and one she had never expected but cherished with every breath. She felt tears sting her eyes as Liam looked up and caught her watching. "She's my little sister," he said proudly, as if it were the most important truth in the world. "And she's already beautiful." Julia pressed a hand over her mouth, her heart aching with tenderness. Sophie beamed at his words, reaching to hug him with sticky frosting-covered fingers. Liam laughed and let her, unfazed by the mess. Aiden and Cole barreled toward the blanket, demanding cake, their cheeks flushed and hair damp with sweat. Mark corralled them with mock sternness, promising cake only after everyone sang. Soon, voices rose together, off-key but joyous, as Sophie clapped her hands and blew out the candles with one determined puff. As Julia watched the smoke curl upward, she felt the years fold in on themselves. She remembered the sterile clinic where she had first learned she carried twins, the terror that had gripped her chest. She remembered Liam shivering in the rain, his small voice trembling with fear. She remembered the gavel striking in the courtroom, the moment he became theirs. And she remembered the disbelief in Mark's eyes when she told him she was pregnant again, the miracle of Sophie's arrival. Every moment had led here, to this picnic, this messy backyard filled with laughter and love. Mark reached for her hand, intertwining his fingers with hers. "You used to be afraid there wouldn't be enough of you to go around," he murmured. She nodded, her throat tight. "I did. And now." She squeezed his hand, her eyes fixed on the children tumbling together in the grass. "Now I know love doesn't divide. It multiplies. My heart, it's bigger than I ever thought it could be." Mark kissed her temple, his smile content. "That's all I ever wanted for you, to see that." The evening stretched golden and warm, the air filled with the scent of cake and flowers, the sound of children's laughter rising above the hum of cicadas. Julia leaned against Mark's shoulder, her gaze lingering on her family. For the first time in her life, she felt completely unburdened by the past. The cycle she had feared would consume her had been broken. In its place stood something new, a family stitched together by both fate and choice, held steady by love. The sun filtered through the maples at the edge of the Dawsons' yard, scattering golden patches of light across the grass. It was late afternoon, the kind of summer day that seemed to stretch lazily toward evening. The family picnic had become a ritual now. Sandwiches packed in a basket, lemonade poured into mason jars, and a blanket spread wide beneath the sky. Today, though, carried a quiet significance. Sophie, now toddling confidently at 3, had decided she was ready to take her first longer steps on the uneven lawn. Her curls bounced as she wobbled forward, arms stretched wide for balance. Julia sat on the blanket, breath caught in her throat, her hands hovering as if ready to catch her youngest at any second. Just a few feet away, Liam walked beside Sophie, his small hand steady near her shoulder, but not holding on. He had grown into his role as big brother with a kind of tenderness that sometimes made Julia's chest ache. "You got it, Sophie," he encouraged, his voice calm and sure. "Keep going. I'm right here." Behind them, Aiden and Cole shouted cheers as though their sister were running a marathon. "Go, Sophie! You can do it! Don't fall!" Their laughter rang across the yard, full of pride in their little sister's determination. Sophie stumbled once, her tiny shoe catching on the grass, but Liam's hand was there in an instant, steadying her before she could fall. She looked up at him, her face breaking into a grin, and pressed forward again until she collapsed into Julia's waiting arms. The yard erupted in applause, led by Mark's deep, joyful laugh. He clapped Aiden and Cole on the shoulders as if they had been her personal trainers. "Your sister's already a champion," he said proudly. Julia hugged Sophie tight, her heart thudding with both relief and wonder. When she looked up, her gaze swept over all 4 children gathered around her, their faces flushed with sunshine and happiness. The picture they made together was almost too much to take in. She thought of the road that had brought them here, the sterile ultrasound room where she had first panicked at the thought of twins, the rain-soaked day when Liam had been a shivering figure clutching a stuffed rabbit, the courtroom where a gavel had struck and changed their lives forever, the night she whispered to Mark that she was pregnant again when hope had seemed impossible. Each moment had felt like a breaking point, and yet, together, they had become stepping stones leading to this exact scene. Julia let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Happiness, she realized, didn't always come the way you planned. Sometimes it arrived in the form of 2 babies instead of 1. Sometimes it appeared as a neighbor's child who needed a home. Sometimes it slipped quietly back into your life when you had been told it was impossible. Her heart swelled with a truth she had once resisted. Love didn't deplete. It grew, expanding to hold every soul entrusted to it. Mark lowered himself onto the blanket beside her, looping an arm around her shoulders. "There's something, aren't they?" he murmured, nodding toward the children, who were already chasing each other around the yard again. Julia leaned into him, her head against his chest. "They're everything," she whispered. For a moment, the 2 of them sat in silence, watching their children dart through the grass. Sophie's laughter high and sweet, Liam's steady voice calling after her, Aiden and Cole tumbling in friendly competition. The late afternoon light bathed them all in gold, wrapping the scene in a warmth that Julia wished she could hold forever. Her mind flickered back to the frightened young woman she had once been, the one who swore she would only ever raise 1 child. That woman would never have believed this moment was possible. But here she was, surrounded by the proof that fear could be reshaped into strength, that scars from childhood could be healed by the very love she had once been afraid to give. Julia kissed the top of Sophie's head, then looked at Mark with tears in her eyes. "We made it," she said softly. He smiled, his thumb brushing her cheek. "Yeah, we did, and I wouldn't change a thing." As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the grass, Julia felt a peace settle over her. The Dawsons were not perfect. There would be scraped knees, sleepless nights, and challenges yet unseen, but they were whole. And that wholeness, earned through pain, choice, and love, was more beautiful than anything she had ever dreamed. The day ended with the family gathered close, their laughter rising with the evening breeze. The blanket was messy with crumbs, the children's clothes streaked with grass stains, but to Julia it was perfect. The picture of a life not planned, but chosen again and again every day. And as twilight settled over Portland, the Dawsons sat together in their backyard, a family complete, their hearts wide enough to hold it all. He stood up, raised his champagne glass, and smiled like a man about to deliver a toast. But what came out of Russell Delaney's mouth wasn't a tribute to our daughter. It was a declaration of war. I'd decided to start a new chapter in my life, without Margaret. The room fell silent, so abruptly I could hear someone drop a fork. 50 pairs of eyes turned toward me, scanning for the expected breakdown. But I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't ask why. I simply looked at him, nodded once, and reached into my purse. The envelope I slid across the white linen tablecloth was cream-colored, thick, unassuming. Russell blinked at it, momentarily confused. "What's this?" he asked, still holding the glass midair. "A little something for you to read later," I said softly, not even bothering to hide the steel beneath my calm. Across the table, Fiona, our daughter, still in her cap and gown, stared at her father like he had grown horns. Her eyes searched mine for answers I wasn't ready to give. Not yet. Today was still her day. I leaned over and kissed her cheek. "I am so proud of you," I whispered. "No one gets to steal that from you." Then I stood up, smoothed the navy silk of my dress, and turned to the room. "Thank you all for coming to celebrate Fiona's incredible achievement. I hope you enjoy the rest of your afternoon." And I walked out, past the astonished faces of our friends, past the servers frozen in place, holding trays of stuffed mushrooms and champagne, past Tessa Monroe, yes, her, the much younger woman Russell had been pretending not to sleep with, who shrank back into her chair like a child caught sneaking candy. The heavy glass doors of the Charleston Club closed behind me with a hush. Outside, the heat of late May wrapped around me like a weighted blanket. My heels clicked against the stone steps, steady and sure. I didn't look back, not until I heard the doors burst open behind me. "Margaret!" Russell's voice wasn't smooth anymore. It was shrill, panic, demanding. "What the hell is this? What did you just hand me?" I didn't stop. I didn't turn around. I let the heat press against my skin and the breeze play with the edge of my shawl. It was the first time in years I had walked away from him without fear, and I liked the feeling. That envelope contained the beginning of my revenge. I'd spent the last 3 months preparing it, quietly, precisely like a woman who'd been burned before and refused to be caught off guard again. I knew Russell would try to humiliate me. I just didn't know he'd do it in front of our daughter, in front of my friends, in front of God and the grilled scallops. But maybe it was better this way. There were no more illusions. We had been married for 28 years. For 26 of those, I had put him first. His business ventures, his crises, his moods. I had stepped back from my own career in finance to raise Fiona, to support Russell's dreams. Even when those dreams changed every 6 months. Even when they cost us money we didn't have. And now he was done with me. Fine. But he'd made one mistake. He thought I'd be helpless without him. He forgot I was the one who paid the bills, who managed the accounts, who filed the taxes. He forgot I knew where the money was hidden and where the debts were buried. He forgot I was the one who kept the whole damn house standing. He was about to remember. 3 months before Fiona's graduation day, I started noticing the numbers didn't add up. Not lipstick on a collar, not late-night texts, just numbers. And I've never been the kind of woman who ignores numbers. I've always managed our household finances, every utility bill, every tuition payment, every line of our retirement plan. So when I saw a $247 withdrawal showing up every Tuesday like clockwork, it set off something in me. ATM withdrawal South Battery Bistro. Not a place we ever went. Too upscale for lunch, too romantic for Russell and his business meetings. It wasn't our kind of restaurant. It was the kind of place where anniversaries happened. Or affairs. I didn't confront him. Not yet. Not because I was afraid, but because I knew how Russell operated. He was slippery with words, quick to accuse me of overreacting, dramatic, insecure. No, if something was going on, I needed evidence. I needed leverage. So I waited. I started printing out our bank statements, weekly, highlighting every unusual transaction. I called the bank and confirmed he'd recently opened a new personal account, something he hadn't even mentioned. A small account, slowly fed by transfers from our joint fund. The amounts weren't large enough to be noticed by someone distracted, but I wasn't distracted. I was paying attention. And then I saw her, Tessa Monroe, at a community fundraiser in mid-March. She wasn't supposed to be there, at least not in that dress, wearing that necklace. It was a delicate rose gold chain with a moonstone pendant from a boutique in Savannah where Russell had once bought me jewelry for our 20th anniversary. He claimed they stopped selling that style. I guess they just stopped selling it to me. Tessa was young, early 30s, loud laugh, polished nails, always networking just a little too hard. I'd brushed her off in the past as one of Russell's professional hangers-on, but now she wore that necklace like a trophy. And I knew. Still, I didn't yell. I didn't make a scene. I made an appointment with an attorney. "Do you have a prenup?" he asked after skimming the folder I brought in. "Russell insisted on it," I replied. "And does it include a fidelity clause?" "It does. And it doesn't expire." The attorney smiled faintly. "Then we have a very strong start." From that day forward, I built a case. I documented every transaction, every reservation, every purchase that didn't line up. I screenshot messages when Russell left his phone unlocked, messages about finally being free, about beachfront homes, about how he'd tell me everything right after Fiona's graduation, because I wouldn't make a scene in public. He really thought I'd just sit there and take it, that I was too soft, too proud, too old to fight back. He underestimated the woman who once paid our mortgage on a single income while he found himself. He forgot who carried this family through every failed venture, every financial drought. I printed everything, organized it into a black zippered binder, and slid it beneath my bed. I didn't talk to anyone, not my sister-in-law Rachel, not even Fiona. I didn't want her final semester clouded by family scandal. But every time Russell smiled at me across the dinner table, I remembered the restaurant receipts. Every time he kissed my cheek in front of friends, I remembered the hotel bookings. Every time he claimed we needed to cut back before retirement, I remembered the $6,000 bracelet charged to a card I didn't know he had. I didn't cry. I planned. Because when a man decides to humiliate you publicly, you only get one chance to decide how the world sees you. And I had already made up my mind. He would regret underestimating me. By early April, I stopped hoping Russell would come clean. That hope had died somewhere between the fake business lunches and the weekend real estate seminars that never showed up on his calendar. What replaced it wasn't rage. It wasn't heartbreak. It was focus. I was done reacting. I was ready to respond with precision. April 3rd, I met with my attorney again. His office overlooked the Ashley River, tucked into a quiet building with ivy crawling up its brick walls. Inside, everything was polished mahogany and soft lighting. But I wasn't there to feel comfortable. I was there to finalize a strategy. "I want the divorce papers filed the morning of Fiona's graduation," I said. He blinked, caught off guard. "You don't want to wait until after?" "He's planning to announce he's leaving me that afternoon," I replied. "I just want to beat him by 6 hours." He leaned back, gave a low whistle. "He doesn't know you've caught on." "No," I said. "He still thinks I'm in the dark. That's what makes it fun." We filed the petition that afternoon. Everything was prepared, signed, and time-stamped, sealed until it would be served at 9 a.m. on graduation day. No one would know until it was too late for him to maneuver. Back at home, Russell was chipper. That evening, he poured wine like we were still in some second honeymoon phase. He joked about Fiona's future and told me how proud he was of her. I watched him over the rim of my glass, cataloging every lie that slid so easily from his mouth. What's the word for that moment when you finally stop loving someone, whatever it is? I reached it that night. In mid-April, I discovered more. The beachfront condo in Isle of Palms. He'd toured it with Tessa 3 times. The leasing agent had left a voicemail confirming Mr. and Mrs. Delaney's application. I called back and politely corrected them. There was no Mrs. Delaney on that lease. Not the one they thought, anyway. I let it slide. I wanted them to think everything was going according to plan. I updated my files. Bank records, signed affidavits, timeline breakdowns. I knew if this ever went to court, Russell would claim I was hysterical or vengeful. So I left a paper trail even a judge couldn't ignore. The final detail? A copy of the prenup. I found it in our home safe, tucked behind tax records he hadn't looked at in years. His own signature, clear as day, next to the clause he'd once insisted on. Infidelity voids claim to shared property, including primary residence. He'd written that clause to protect himself from me. Now it would protect me from him. I slipped a clean, notarized copy into a cream envelope and slid it into my purse. The same purse I would carry to Fiona's graduation lunch. The same envelope I would slide across the table, next to the plate of a man too arrogant to know the storm he'd walked into. On April 28th, 5 days before graduation, Tessa texted him, "Everything's almost perfect. I can't wait to start fresh with you." I didn't need to read the rest. I just forwarded the message to my attorney and deleted it from his phone. Not because I was covering for him, but because I wanted him to be completely unprepared when everything unraveled. Russell thought he was setting the stage for a grand exit. He had no idea I'd already written the final act, and when the curtain fell, I'd be the only one standing. The morning of May 3rd dawned like any other spring morning in Charleston. Hazy light seeping through the bedroom shutters, the low hum of cicadas already buzzing beyond the glass. The kind of morning that begged for calm, but I wasn't calm. I was ready. I woke at 5:45 long before Russell. He snored gently beside me, blissfully unaware that by the time he stood up to deliver his little "I'm leaving you" speech, I'd already made mine. In legal ink. I took my time getting dressed. Navy silk dress, pearl earrings, low heels. Simple, classic, appropriate for a mother attending her only child's college graduation. But everything I wore that day had been chosen like armor. Not to impress, to hold me together. By 7:30, I was in the kitchen brewing coffee. My hands moved automatically, pour, stir, sip, but my mind was racing through details. The file folder was zipped inside my purse. The envelope was ready. The court clerk would release the petition in 90 minutes. By 8:10, Russell stumbled in, yawning, stretching like nothing in the world was off balance. "You're up early," he said, reaching for a mug. "Big day," I replied, keeping my voice steady. He smiled and kissed my cheek like we were still a team. "Can you believe she's graduating already?" I could. I'd believed in Fiona since she was 6 and explained compound interest better than her father ever could. "We should leave by 9, he said. I made a reservation for lunch afterward. Little surprise I put together. You'll love it." I smiled. I didn't ask where. I already knew. He thought he was leading me into a setup. A perfectly curated scene to announce our separation in public, soften the blow with smiles and champagne flutes. Make himself the hero of the narrative. Instead, I was the one guiding him straight into a minefield he didn't even know existed. At 9 a.m. sharp, I received the text, filed and sealed. "Good luck today." It was from Philip, my attorney. Short and clean, like everything about this plan. Russell was still getting ready. I stepped out onto our back porch, watching the sunlight rise over the garden I had kept alive for 15 years, while he flitted from one failed venture to another. I remembered planting those hydrangeas during his entrepreneurial sabbatical, which turned out to be 6 months of fishing trips and craft beer tastings with men half his age. I wondered if he even remembered the color of those blooms. At 9:40, we pulled out of the driveway. I sat in the passenger seat of the SUV we'd once picked out together like it was a dream car. He chatted about Fiona, about moving to the coast, about nothing at all. Every word just noise now, hollow and irrelevant. Fiona's graduation was held in the outdoor amphitheater at Charleston University. Rows of folding chairs, students in caps and gowns buzzing with nervous energy. I held my breath when I saw her, our daughter, radiant, confident, alive with possibility. She spotted us from a distance and waved. I smiled and waved back, but a part of me broke. Because Fiona didn't know what was about to happen. She didn't know that the man who had promised to be her anchor would rip our family apart within the hour. And she didn't know that I'd been keeping that storm at bay for months, just long enough for her to walk across that stage without shame in her heart. The ceremony passed in a blur. Applause, speeches, camera flashes. Fiona's name echoed through the loudspeaker, and the crowd cheered. My hands ached from clapping. My face ached from smiling. But I held it together for her. Afterward, we took photos. I stood between them, one arm around Fiona, the other loosely draped around Russell. I doubt I'll ever look at those pictures again, but I posed for them anyway, because some things you do for your child even when your soul is splintering. At 1:15 p.m., we walked into the Charleston Club. Private dining room, linen draped tables, chilled champagne waiting. I could smell the ocean through the tall windows. The table was set. The guests were seated. The silverware gleamed. Russell stood to speak, and I smiled. Russell tapped his glass with a spoon. The soft chime echoed through the dining room like a warning bell. Conversations faded. Chairs stilled. Even the waitstaff paused near the doors, sensing something out of place. Everyone, he said, beaming like a politician, thank you for joining us today to celebrate our daughter's incredible achievement. Fiona, we're so proud of you. She smiled, unsure, sensing something off. Russell lifted his champagne glass higher. And since we're all here, I wanted to take a moment to share something personal. Something life-changing. I felt the eyes shift toward me before he even spoke the next words. I've decided, he said, pausing for dramatic effect, to begin a new chapter of my life, one where Margaret and I will be going our separate ways. There it was, a quiet gasp from somewhere to my left, a clink of glass on wood. Fiona's face fell, confusion flickering into horror. Russell, I said softly. He turned, surprised I was speaking at all. I reached into my purse. From it, I pulled the cream-colored envelope, the same one I'd sealed 3 weeks earlier, after double-checking every clause, every asset line, every timestamp. I set it beside his plate, neat, deliberate. What's this? He asked, his confident facade twitching. Something for you to read later. My voice didn't waver. Fiona looked between us, mouth slightly open. Her cap still rested askew on her curls, and her eyes, those eyes I'd once watched in a hospital bassinet, were wide with panic. I turned to her, brushed a curl from her cheek, and smiled. This is still your day, sweetheart, I whispered. Don't let anyone take that from you. Then I turned to the room. My voice was even, measured, like I was reading a thank you card rather than unraveling a marriage. Thank you all for being here to celebrate Fiona. She's earned every bit of this joy. Please enjoy your meal. And I walked out. I didn't look back. Not when the chatter turned into whispers. Not when Russell's voice stammered behind me. Not when someone dropped a fork. The club's heavy wooden doors shut behind me with a dull thud. Outside, the air was thick and warm. Charleston in May. A little cruel. A little beautiful. I stepped out into the sun, pulled my shawl tight, and finally exhaled. Behind me, footsteps. The door burst open. Margaret! Russell's voice had changed. No longer smooth and controlled. It was shrill now, threatening. What the hell is this? He barked, waving the envelope in one hand like it might catch fire. What did you do? I didn't stop walking. You gave me divorce papers on our daughter's graduation day. No, I said, still walking. I gave them to you before your little speech. That's the difference between strategy and spectacle. He caught up beside me, still puffing like a man who'd lost control of a room and didn't know why. You think you've won. I stopped. Finally, I turned. I'm not trying to win, Russell. I'm trying to get free. He blinked, thrown off. The prenup is expired, he hissed. You don't get to keep everything. You don't get to act like I'm the bad guy. I took a breath. Calm. Measured. Section 14, I said. Fidelity clause. Stays in effect until the dissolution of marriage is finalized. You should have read what you signed. His face drained of color. I leaned in, just enough for him to hear the next part. You insisted on that clause to protect yourself. 28 years ago, before you had a penny to your name. And now, it's going to cost you everything. Behind him, the club's tall windows reflected his stunned face. A man dressed for victory, but walking into his own funeral. He opened his mouth to say something else, but I was already walking away. Each step down that path felt heavier and lighter at the same time, like shedding armor I never wanted to wear. The sun was blinding now, but I didn't need to see what was behind me. I already knew what it looked like. The end of his story, the beginning of mine. I arrived home before him. Of course I did. He had stayed behind to explain, to deflect, to spin. Russell always preferred to control the story, while I had already written the ending. The house was quiet when I stepped inside. Too quiet. Our home, an old federal-style house just north of Charleston's historic quarter, had always been full of life, of clutter, of conversations drifting from room to room. But that afternoon it felt like a shell, the version of our life that Russell had curated for social media, but never lived in fully. The air was cool. The faint smell of lavender from the linen spray I always used still lingered. And yet everything felt staged, like a memory I no longer wanted to walk through. I went upstairs to the primary bedroom, opened the closet, and there it was, 2 black Samsonite suitcases, packed, hidden behind his side of the winter coats. He'd been planning this getaway carefully. Clothes rolled neatly, a folder on top with labeled documents, banking, passport copies, a rental lease with Tessa Monroe's name beside his. He thought he would just leave, just vanish, just reinvent himself. I smiled. He never imagined I'd flip the script first. I didn't unpack the suitcases. I didn't touch anything. I simply took photos of everything, date stamped and filed into my growing folder titled Russell's Escape Plan. Documentation was its own kind of weapon. I had learned that long ago in corporate finance. It's not what you feel. It's what you can prove. At 6:18 p.m., I heard the garage door rattle open. The door slammed harder than it needed to. He was home. "Margaret!" he shouted from the hallway, as though nothing had happened, as though we were in the middle of some routine spat that could be handled with wine and avoidance. I was in the living room, sitting with my laptop open, reviewing a spreadsheet for one of the divorce attorneys I had quietly begun consulting for. It felt poetic. He stormed in, envelope still clutched in his hand like it had burned him. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, waving it. "You already know," I said. "You served me divorce papers today of all days? Fiona's graduation." "You planned your little speech for today," I replied evenly. I just adjusted the timeline. "You had no right. I had every right." My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. That's the thing about truth. It doesn't shout. It just stands there, solid and still. "You think you're going to take the house? The assets? The prenup doesn't even apply anymore. That thing's practically antique." I closed my laptop gently. "Actually, no. It's valid. Section 12. The fidelity clause is enforceable for the duration of the marriage. You signed that, Russell. You insisted on it." He blinked hard. The realization was starting to sink in. He hadn't consulted a lawyer before all this. He thought I would crumble, that I'd beg him to stay, that I'd trade dignity for stability. But he was wrong. I stood and walked toward the fireplace, where our wedding photo still sat on the mantel. I looked at it, not with longing, not with pain, but with clinical detachment. "I spent 28 years protecting this family," I said quietly, "while you took risks, while you flailed and wandered and reinvented yourself every 6 months. I waited for you to land. And you never did." He didn't speak. Not right away. His face was pale now, the edges red with frustration. "You've always been calculating," he said, trying to turn it on me. "But this is cold." "No, Russell," I said, finally facing him. "Cold was what you did, taking our money, lying to our daughter, humiliating me in front of friends. What I'm doing now." I paused, just long enough to let it settle. "This is called consequences." His phone buzzed in his pocket. He didn't answer, but I already knew who it was. Tessa. The new life he'd promised her was beginning to unravel before it ever had the chance to begin. I left that night, not because I had to, but because I wanted him to sit in the silence of the house he'd planned to abandon me in. Let him stew in it. Let him explain to no one why the bedroom closet still held only his suits and nothing else. I drove to Rachel's. My sister-in-law lived in a small blue Craftsman just 10 minutes from the university, tucked behind a row of old oaks and creaking front porches. She was waiting on the steps, barefoot, arms folded, her face already lit with fire. "I just heard," she said as I stepped out of the car. "He actually did it." "He did," I said. "And you served him first?" I nodded. "Right before the toast." Rachel let out a low whistle. "Damn. Remind me never to get on your bad side." She didn't ask if I was okay. Rachel never wasted words on questions when the answer was obvious. Instead, she opened the door, led me inside, and poured wine without speaking. We settled into her sunroom, surrounded by old books, mismatched cushions, and the faint scent of lemon polish. "I remember when he made you sign that prenup," she said after a while, swirling the wine in her glass. "He was so paranoid, so sure he was going to be rich someday." "He was protecting himself from the woman who paid for his first startup," I replied. The irony writes itself. We laughed, not because it was funny, but because the alternative was screaming. At 9:17 p.m., my phone buzzed. "Fiona." I stared at the screen for a moment before answering. "Mom." Her voice cracked immediately. "I'm here," I said. "I'm coming over." "You don't have to. I'm already in the car." She hung up. 15 minutes later, she arrived still in her dress, her heels in one hand, mascara streaked down her cheeks like war paint. She stepped inside and fell into my arms like she used to when she was little. After scraped knees, bad dreams mean girls. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, voice muffled against my shoulder. "Because I didn't want to ruin your semester," I said softly. "Or your day." "Dad did that anyway," she muttered. We sat on Rachel's couch, Fiona tucked against my side, legs curled beneath her like she had just come in from the cold. "I knew something was off," she whispered. "He's been distracted for months. Distant. Always texting. I didn't say I told you so. I didn't say anything." Rachel walked in with more wine and a plate of crackers, set them down quietly and left us alone. And then I told Fiona everything. The transfers, the restaurant bills, the fake business trips, the real estate viewings, the photos, the texts, the prenup. I watched her face change as the puzzle pieces locked into place. Shock turned to anger, anger to grief, grief to clarity. She shook her head slowly. "I was working 2 jobs this semester. He told me money was tight. He let me believe we were struggling." I nodded. "While shopping for beachfront property with someone who calls you that girl from the first marriage." She inhaled sharply. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner," I said. "I wanted to protect you. I still do." "I'm not mad at you," Fiona said. "I'm just mad." "That's okay. Be mad." She looked up at me. "Are we going to be okay?" "Yes," I said, "but not overnight." Her eyes filled again, but she wiped them fast. Then her jaw set. Her voice dropped. "He's telling everyone you've gone crazy." I didn't blink. "Let him. He's saying you plotted this for months." "I did." She blinked at me, but not for the reasons he thinks. I showed her the text from my attorney, the prenup clause, the financial timeline, the black zippered folder, now sitting on Rachel's dining table like a loaded weapon. Fiona exhaled, slowly nodded, and said the words I'll never forget. "Good. Then let's finish what he started." The doorbell rang at 10:12 p.m. Rachel peeked through the side window and groaned. "You've got to be kidding me." She turned to me. "It's him." I rose from the couch, heart steady now. Not racing. Not afraid. Just ready. And he's not alone, Rachel added, voice colder now. Tessa's with him. Fiona stood beside me before I could stop her. I want to be here for this. Rachel opened the door. Russell stepped in first. Face flushed, tie loosened, eyes already scanning for weakness. Tessa followed behind, arms crossed, heels clicking on the hardwood. She wore a silk blouse and that moonstone necklace again, like it meant something. The living room felt too small all at once, filled with too much noise, too much ego. Rachel leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, silent but coiled. Russell spoke first. Margaret, we need to talk. By all means, I said, talk. He cleared his throat, eyes darting to Fiona. This doesn't involve her. Fiona scoffed. You blew up our family during my graduation lunch. You don't get to decide who's involved anymore. He shifted uncomfortably. This has gotten out of control. You froze the accounts. You're dragging this into court. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. How was it supposed to go, Russell? I asked. You blindside me in public, walk off into the sunset with your girlfriend, and still keep half of everything. His jaw clenched. Tessa placed a hand on his arm. Greg, maybe. I told you not to call me that in front of them, he snapped, brushing her off. Fiona raised an eyebrow. Did you seriously think you could control all of this? That mom would just accept it. Russell ignored her. Turned to me. You always said we were a team. I nodded. We were. Until you changed teams. You're being vindictive, he said. This isn't you. You never knew me, I replied. You knew the version of me that kept quiet, so the family didn't collapse. Rachel snorted. Guess what, Russell? It collapsed anyway. He turned on her. Oh, please. You never liked me. She shrugged. You were tolerable until you weren't. Tessa cleared her throat, trying to steady herself. I didn't know he was going to make the announcement like that. I thought he was going to speak to you privately. And yet you sat through the toast like it was a performance, I said. Because it was. She flushed. I'm sorry. The words fell like feathers, weightless, empty. Fiona stepped forward now. Her voice was clear, sharp. You let him use my graduation as a stage. You helped him turn one of the most important days of my life into damage control. And you're sorry. Tessa looked down. Russell tried again. Margaret, let's just be rational. Unfreeze the accounts. Let's avoid dragging our daughter through a courtroom battle. The accounts stay frozen, I said, arms crossed, until discovery is complete. That's 3 more days. You can survive. Russell's voice rose. With what? You locked me out of everything. No, I said calmly. I left you access to your personal account, the one you've been moving money into for over a year. That should be more than enough. Tessa's head snapped toward him. You have a separate account, she asked. He hesitated. It's just for logistics. How much is in it? She pressed. Silence. She looked back at me, then at him. Her face changed. That apartment you promised me, that car, none of it's happening, is it? Russell stammered, but Tessa had already stepped away from him, arms folded tightly. Wow, she said quietly. You lied to both of us. Welcome to the club, I muttered. Rachel gave a slow, satisfied nod. And just like that, the pyramid collapses. Russell turned to Fiona, reaching out. Sweetheart, please, don't let her poison you against me. She stepped back. You did that all by yourself. Silence followed, heavy, complete. Finally I spoke. You have until tomorrow at 6 p.m. to remove your belongings from the house. After that, the locks change. Margaret, this isn't a negotiation. He stared at me, furious, stunned, hollow. Tessa turned and left without a word. Russell followed a moment later, muttering something under his breath. The door closed behind them. Fiona looked at me. You didn't raise your voice once. I didn't need to. The next morning, I met Philip outside the Charleston County Courthouse. It was overcast, gray skies, damp air, and that faint scent of rain on brick. I wore navy slacks, a blazer, and low heels. No drama, just business, the way I always handled things. Philip handed me a copy of the emergency filing. It's done, he said. Discovery opens Monday. You'll have full access to trace the offshore transfers. And the freeze? I asked. Upheld. He can't touch joint funds, investment accounts, or real estate equity until we're through the full hearing. I nodded. Good. Philip glanced at his watch. He's going to panic. That's the point. By noon, the fallout had already started. Rachel called me from work. Her voice was low, urgent, thrilled. You're not going to believe this, she said. Tessa's packing up her desk. She just stormed out of her office. Told someone she was lied to about everything. I didn't laugh. Not yet. She found out the beachfront condo lease never went through, Rachel continued. Turns out the leasing agent called to confirm a credit discrepancy on the home phone. You handled that, didn't you? I did. And the car? Cancelled. Rachel whistled. Girl! By 3 p.m. the rumors were flying. Not because I spread them. I didn't have to. Charleston social circles were old money polite on the surface. But when someone fell from grace, the whispers spread like wildfire behind garden gates and tennis club bars. Russell had spent years building an image. Self-made, charming community leader. But those same people now discovered the truth. That he'd moved funds behind my back, that his new chapter had collapsed before it began, and that he'd underestimated the one person who knew his every weakness. I got a text from a longtime acquaintance. If you ever decide to run a war room, count me in. At 4:42 p.m., Tessa called me. I stared at the name blinking across the screen for a long time before I picked up. Margaret. Her voice was small. Hello. I'm sorry to bother you. I didn't know who else to call. I waited. I moved in with him, she said. I believed everything he told me. About you. About Fiona. About the money. I stayed silent. I didn't know the prenup was real. I didn't know he was using me as a prop to make his exit look justified. She sounded broken. I'm not looking for sympathy, she added quickly. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. For your daughter. For how today went. For being stupid. I let the pause stretch. Then I said, I appreciate the apology. I don't need it, but Fiona might. She sniffed audibly. He promised me a future. Said you were the one keeping him from it. He was the one keeping himself from it, I replied. He always was. Silence. Then, he said you'd come after him for everything. I didn't have to come after him, I said. He handed it all to me in a folder 28 years ago. Another pause. Then, he's not who I thought he was. No, I said, but now you are. She didn't respond, just hung up. I stared at my phone for a long while, then turned it off. Set it face down. Let the silence settle like dust. That evening, Fiona came home with 2 bottles of wine and takeout from our favorite Italian place. You should have seen his face today, she said, unwrapping garlic knots. He was flailing. Did he try to defend himself? Worse, he tried to rewrite the story. Told one of my professors you'd manipulated him into marrying you. I raised an eyebrow. Did he mention I funded his first business? No, but she Googled him. We laughed, and for the first time in a long time it felt real. No masks, no pretending, just mother and daughter, starting over. By 9 p.m., we were sitting on the back porch, feet up, wine half gone. You know what the best part is. Fiona said, he thought he had the upper hand, right up until you slid that envelope across the table. I smiled. That envelope, I said, wasn't just the end of our marriage. It was the beginning of your empire. The hearing was set for Tuesday, May 9th. The rain came early that morning, soft and steady, tapping against the courthouse windows like a slow drumbeat. I arrived 15 minutes early with Philip, my attorney, binder in hand, calm as stone. Not a shred of makeup out of place. Not a single paper missing. Russell arrived at 9:01 a.m., late, flustered, wearing a wrinkled blazer that still had the tag thread hanging from the cuff. His new attorney, some fresh-faced associate from a corporate firm in Mount Pleasant, trailed behind him like a lost intern. He hadn't hired a family lawyer. He didn't think he'd need one. That was his first mistake. We sat at opposite tables in a courtroom that smelled faintly of mildew and cheap carpet cleaner. The judge, a silver-haired woman named Justice Elkins, entered with the quiet authority of someone who'd seen too many men like Russell crash into their own egos. She adjusted her glasses, flipped through the file, and looked up. "This is regarding the financial emergency motion in Caldwell versus Caldwell," she said, eyes sharp. "Mrs. Caldwell, your filing indicates a violation of the financial transparency clause in the prenuptial agreement. Is that correct?" Philip stood. "Yes, Your Honor. We've provided documentation of systematic fund transfers, unauthorized joint account activity, and evidence of marital infidelity, activating Section 12 of the prenup." Justice Elkins turned to Russell. "Do you contest the validity of the agreement?" His lawyer cleared his throat. "We believe the prenup has expired due to the length of the marriage." She nodded, flipped to Section 18, and read aloud. "This agreement shall remain valid for the duration of the marriage and any legal proceedings stemming from its dissolution." She looked over her glasses at Russell. "Seems airtight to me." Russell leaned in to whisper something to his lawyer, who nodded. But his ears were red now, his posture sinking. "And the evidence of concealed funds?" she asked. Philip handed over our file. Over $78,000 transferred discreetly across 9 months, itemized with bank statements, dates, and corresponding restaurant and lodging charges for his extramarital partner. Justice Elkins skimmed the folder. "Did you seriously think this would go unnoticed, Mr. Caldwell?" "I didn't mean," Russell began, but the judge cut him off with a raised hand. "I've ruled on more than 300 divorce hearings, and I've yet to see a man dig his own grave so cleanly." She set the file aside. "The freeze on joint accounts will remain in place. The court finds probable violation of financial disclosure terms and upholds the infidelity clause." Russell's jaw dropped. "Additionally," she continued, "the primary residence shall remain in Mrs. Caldwell's possession pending the final settlement. All vacation and investment properties tied to joint accounts will be reviewed under marital asset division guidelines." Philip leaned toward me. "You're winning." I didn't smile. Not yet. But I exhaled for the first time that morning. Russell's face had gone from red to gray. His lawyer looked like he wanted to disappear into his own file folder. The judge banged the gavel once. "Final hearing set for June 12th. Court is adjourned." Outside, the rain had stopped. Russell caught up to me in the hallway, one hand clutching his file, the other shoved deep in his pocket. "Margaret, please," he said. "We don't have to do this in court. We can figure something out." I turned slowly. "You had months to figure something out. You chose secrecy, deception, humiliation." "I made a mistake." "No," I said, calm and cold. "You made a decision, and now you get to live with it." He looked like he might say more, but he didn't. Just stood there, shoulders caved, soaked by consequences he never thought would reach him. Philip and I walked away without looking back. That night, I poured myself 1 glass of wine and stood at the kitchen window, watching water drip off the hydrangeas. I had once built a life with a man who lied with confidence and smiled while he did it. But now, piece by piece, I was building something else entirely, and he was left with the ruins. It was the second Sunday after the hearing when Rachel called again. Her voice, as usual, carried the delicious edge of barely contained glee. "She's gone," she said. "Packed up, moved out, told everyone at the office she needed to find herself again." I didn't have to ask who. "Tessa, she leave him a note?" I asked, sipping my tea. Nope, Rachel replied. She left him a cold cup of coffee and an empty apartment. I chuckled. That's one way to end a fantasy. Apparently, after the preliminary hearing, things had unraveled fast. The vacation condo had fallen through due to credit issues. The sports car Russell had promised was repossessed when the financing bounced. And worst of all, for his ego at least, Tessa had realized she wasn't getting the glamorous second wife life she'd been sold. She wanted beachfront walks and cocktail parties. What she got was overdraft fees and frozen assets. By June, she was gone. I never heard from her again. Russell tried, of course. He sent emails, long, rambling ones, blaming the lawyers, blaming me, blaming miscommunication. At one point, he even blamed Fiona, as if her disappointment had somehow been a betrayal. I never replied. I had more important things to do, like rebuilding my life. With the house officially under my name, I started clearing it of everything that wasn't truly mine. Photos came down. Awards with his name went into boxes. I kept the books, the garden tools, and the lemon tree we had planted the year Fiona turned 10. That tree still thrived, unlike the marriage. By July, I'd signed a lease on a small office space downtown, a converted row house with creaky floors, tall windows, and just enough room for 2 desks and a coffee station. I hung a sign by the door. Whitmore Financial Transitions, helping women navigate what comes next. My first client was a widow in her 60s, terrified of outliving her money. My second was a woman divorcing a man who reminded me far too much of Russell. By the end of summer, I had a full calendar and a waiting list. I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. Fiona came by every Sunday for brunch, sometimes with files to help me organize a marketing plan, sometimes with a bottle of wine and a stack of photos to go through. One morning in late August, she stood in the doorway of my new office, arms crossed, watching me set up client folders. "You're different now," she said. I looked up. "Good different, or—" She smiled. "The best kind. Like you finally took off a heavy coat you didn't realize you'd been wearing for decades." I paused, hand still on a binder. She was right. I had spent so many years protecting, softening, smoothing, keeping Russell afloat, keeping Fiona unaware, keeping the image intact. Now I was just me. No mask, no script, no man explaining my value for me. That night, I sat alone on the back porch again. The air was still. The lemon tree rustled faintly in the dark. I thought about everything I had lost, and realized I hadn't lost anything I truly needed. Russell had underestimated me, so had almost everyone else. But in that quiet evening stillness, I finally understood something I'd never dared admit before. I hadn't just gotten my life back. I had created one I actually wanted. The final hearing fell on a Monday, June 12th. It would have been our 29th wedding anniversary. I didn't mark it on the calendar. I didn't wear anything symbolic. No black dress, no red lipstick. Just a navy suit, low heels, and the calm composure of a woman who had nothing left to prove. Russell arrived looking like a man hollowed out. His tan had faded, the cocky smirk replaced by sunken eyes and slack shoulders. The ring was gone from his finger, but the indentation remained, a pale circle where something used to be. His new attorney, a more seasoned family lawyer this time, carried 2 thick binders. I brought one. That was enough. The courtroom was nearly empty. Just us, our lawyers, the judge, and a bailiff who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Judge Elkins didn't waste time. "The court has reviewed all submitted documents. I find the prenuptial agreement valid and enforceable under South Carolina law, including the infidelity clause." Russell shifted. "The division of assets shall proceed as follows. Mrs. Caldwell retains the primary residence, 70% of joint investments, and full access to her retirement accounts." I remained still. "Mr. Caldwell retains personal possessions, the contents of his private account, and business holdings as outlined in Exhibit G." I already knew what Exhibit G said. The business was worth very little now. He'd lost 2 contracts after word got out. His credit was shot. And Tessa, as Rachel later told me, was now dating a real estate developer in Mount Pleasant. The gavel came down like a quiet ending. Divorce finalized, Judge Elkins said. Best of luck to you both. I gathered my bag, nodded to Philip, and turned to leave. But Russell followed me into the hallway. Margaret, he said, his voice rough. Wait. I paused. He looked smaller. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I studied him. The man who had once promised me forever, then offered me nothing but silence and betrayal. You said that before, I replied. I know. He exhaled. You were always better than me. Smarter. Stronger. I think that scared me. I didn't respond. I thought I wanted something new, he said, staring at the tiled floor. What I really wanted was to not feel invisible. That stung. Not for him, but for me. For all the years I had poured love into a man who didn't know how to receive it. I hope you find peace, Russell, I said finally, but it won't be with me. He nodded slowly. Do you think someday we could talk again? Maybe as friends? I gave him a soft, sad smile. No, that chapter is closed. His face fell, but he didn't argue, didn't plead, just stood there, alone in the corridor of a courthouse he never imagined himself in. I turned and walked away, heels echoing with every step, each one further from who I used to be, and closer to the woman I had become. Outside, the Charleston sun was shining, hot and high and unapologetic. I didn't go home right away. Instead, I walked to my office. The sign on the glass door still made me smile. Whitmore Financial Transitions, helping women navigate what comes next. My first appointment that afternoon was with a woman in her late 50s, recently widowed, unsure how to manage the money her husband had left behind. I welcomed her in with a smile, poured her tea, listened to her story, because I knew now there is life after betrayal. There is strength after silence. And sometimes the most powerful thing a woman can do is begin again. 6 months later, I stood in my office kitchen, making a cup of tea between client calls. The leaves outside had turned burnt orange, deep rust, gold so rich it almost hurt to look at. Charleston in November was always beautiful in a subdued, understated way, like a woman who no longer needed to be noticed to feel powerful. Business was good, better than good. Whitmore Financial Transitions had grown from a side project into something real, something solid. I now had 2 part-time associates, smart, capable women who had left high-stress corporate jobs to do work that actually mattered. We didn't just talk numbers. We talked fear, freedom, and futures. Most of my clients were women like me, not just widows and divorcees, but women who had spent decades making everyone else's dreams possible, until one day they realized no one had made room for theirs. Helping them felt like helping an earlier version of myself crawl out from under a life that had grown too small. Fiona visited every other weekend. She'd moved into a brownstone apartment near her new office and painted her kitchen cabinets sage green. She'd started dating someone, a kind, quiet software engineer named Devin, who once brought me homemade apple muffins. He was nothing like her father. That was the point. You look lighter, Fiona said during one of our Sunday brunches. You laugh more. I breathe more, I replied. It was true. The old tension in my shoulders, the constant mental checklist of Russell's moods, his deadlines, his crises, it was gone. I no longer built my life around avoiding someone else's disappointments. Now I built things for me. The garden behind the house had flourished. I had planted lavender and lemon balm, replaced the patio furniture, painted the fence myself over 3 weekends. Sometimes I sat out there at dusk, glass of wine in hand, and listened to the wind move through the trees. No noise, no apology, just air and breath and space. Russell had moved out of state. The last I heard, he was renting a condo in Florida. His business had folded. He tried to start another one, but word had gotten around. Even old friends were reluctant to invest. Once the glitter peeled away, all that was left was someone who didn't know how to exist without being adored. I didn't miss him. I didn't hate him either. He was just a chapter, one with too many footnotes and not enough meaning. Sometimes I thought about that day at Fiona's graduation. The toast he never finished. The envelope I slid across the table. That wasn't just the moment everything changed. That was the moment I remembered who I was. A woman who had built a home, raised a daughter, carried a marriage, paid the bills, smoothed the storms, endured the silence, and finally let it all burn. Not in rage, but in release. I glanced at the framed quote above my desk, something Fiona had given me after the hearing. A simple line printed in gold. She remembered who she was, and the game changed. I smiled. My phone buzzed. A new client referral. A woman in her early 60s, recently divorced. Scared. I sent a warm reply and scheduled her consultation for Thursday. Then I took a breath, looked out the window, and stepped into the next part of my life,